This week, Tyson Slocum, Director of Public Citizens Energy Program, is going to give you all the nasty details on the methane leak in California, the backstory, present putrid mess, and what's next. Also, some silver lining stories, plus next week is an important week of action all across the U.S. So mark your calendars. But first, let's start off with a contemplative musing. How do you remember? How do you remember that day? The way the air smelled, what you wore, what time you walked out the door. Was it cold? Did your skin prickle, hair bristle? Did the wind whistle? Were you tired? Did you feel inspired, depressed, under or overdressed? What did you perceive in this mess, this day that started out just the same and ended? Well, it never did end anyway. It's still going, mowing down mentions, those last good intentions, stacking pretension on psychiatric tension, flirting with madness, knocking on reason's door, but what for? No one's home and nonsense has held this floor. Here's the score. Whatever you saw, whatever you did, whatever that scene that dug deep won't release, made craters in otherwise fine happy days, tattooed the word lost on maps that trace back. Look, I lost track to that point in time when your mind, like protesters cornered on street corners, cry, shut it down. And let's just say they won. Shut down but still standing, your senses demanding a compromise here, a binding agreement that you'll still receive it, what's happening outside in there. You sign it, don't mind it, you can't. But your eyes, ears, and nose, the palms of your hands, the taste of this craze, now has strict orders placed to cut through your borders and do as they please. In this unique breach, this sudden hard cease of order of mind. No structured design, no well-labeled sign saying eyes over this way, match what we hear. Label this crazy, no, nothing is clear. Senses relentless, pile upon pile, a trash heap of all these moments could reap, memories stranded to rest incomplete. As traffic resumes through the streets of your mind, there's backup and chaos. Where can I find anything? What is this? What is that? Who left this here? And what does this mean? Is this really what I did see? That doesn't sound right. I wouldn't. This can't be real. But it is. But that doesn't matter. You're searching for patterns, an inch in this mile to grab onto file like David Lynch scenes, accepting the crazy as what you believe, what you perceived. Who's to say? I was there. I can't make much sense, but my senses did wrench from there something. A morsel, a sliver, the truth I'll deliver. Just give me a moment to find it. But the longer you wait... See, our minds aren't pristine or perfect. Rewind, over time, shadows and noise, like that street with no sign. Remember the place, not the name. Wisps of a memory fading, fragments of details that time's been degrading. The mess of that day. The piles and piles, the miles of clutter, alleyways, exits, a fluttering shutter like Morse code relating that day. That day for you ends, where it will never cease. Where it replays that same broken record like a nagging sick tease. Your mind can't agree. I did bend. Did I break? Even cracks in the street make a road, and indeed, how would you know to rebuild? Unless fractures from that day were shown. Truth is the pain, the you that remains, the mind and soul bending, unwilling to break. Truth is a digging game. Build as you excavate, learn and investigate, set down your spade, and now, how do you remember that day? Lady Liberty, Justice, enslaved. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out. Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. Coming to you from Snowmageddon 2016, we have a special edition episode for you this week. But before we get to that, let's take a quick look at the front lines and some badass activist victories. So, TPP. Remember last week when I said there's about 1,000 other things that you could and should be paying attention to besides the presidential rat race? Well, TPP is the big one, and I've been picking up the slack that the corporate media has left by mentioning it almost every episode. So, if you haven't heard of it, check out one of our previous episodes, where we go into much more detail than we will right now. For those of you who already know all about it, here's what you need to know for next week. On February 4th, President Obama will be in New Zealand to sign the TPP, at a casino no less, which actually feels kind of appropriate, what with the gambling away of our environment, our food, our jobs, our water, our air, our digital rights, our sovereignty. As they say, the House always wins. And speaking of the House, once Obama signs this travesty, it will still need to be ratified by Congress, which could be a lengthy and very, very convoluted process. I'll get into that later next week, but that being said, we can't sit back and watch a droll play of let legalese rock us to sleep. Continued and escalating action is necessary to make it vehemently clear that fuck the TPP. So, in response to Obama's corporate coup signage, protests are planned across the U.S. on the 3rd and 4th, the 3rd in the U.S. being the 4th in New Zealand time zones. For more information on those protests or to create your own, check out flushthetpp.org/actions. Now, before I move on to our special edition, I'd like to take a moment to lift your spirits with these two stories. Up first, the U.S. Forest Service announced last week that they're rejecting Dominion's plans to lay part of their Atlantic Coast Pipeline through 2 national forests because, fucking duh. The Forest Service cited sensitive resources and endangered species as the main reasons why they are rejecting this project. Now, this could give other agencies such as the Fish and Wildlife Service the necessary boost to take their concerns from nebulous uncertainty to similar smackdowns on big oil and gas. Secondly, also last week, Multnomah County commissioners unanimously passed a resolution that opposes projects shipping crude oil by rail through their county. This makes them the largest county yet to pass a resolution against oil trains, those ludicrous explosive sludge snakes we mentioned in episode 45. FYI, Multnomah County is the biggest county in Oregon, with Portland as its seat. Now, from this decision, Governor Jay Inslee has the final say on whether to uphold this opposition, thereby making it a ban. For more information on this fight, check out standuptooil.org. So now that I've given you the good news, let's shift now to the bad news. You've no doubt heard about the horrendous methane gas leak in California being compared to the BP oil spill in terms of intensity and shittiness. Well, here to give us some more information on the severity, the backstory, the who, why, where, and when is the Director of Public Citizens Energy Program, Tyson Slocum. Take a look. So, first of all, let's talk the facts. More than 10,000 residents have been forced to evacuate due to flammable and toxic fumes, which cause headaches, nausea, vomiting, dizziness, blackouts, and even death. An estimated 150 million pounds of methane has already leaked. And methane is 87 times more potent than carbon dioxide. This is all what I picked up from your press release. What am I missing? Right. What severe issues am I missing in this?
Well, I think you've captured all of it. But the most shocking thing about this thing is how long it's been going on. The leak was first detected on October 23rd of 2015. It's now in January of 2016. And the estimates to stop the leak at the earliest, it's not going to happen until late February. And people are very shocked that it takes this long to control a methane leak of this volume and this size. The second shocking thing about this whole incident is how little centralized regulatory oversight exists over hundreds of such facilities stretched across the United States. As we've seen in the Aliso Canyon example in California, this single facility's leaks of methane represent a quarter of the entire state of California's greenhouse gas emissions. And even though the state of California has a fairly good climate change statute that requires all sorts of detailed reporting and regulations controlling emissions from regulated sources, a leaking underground natural gas storage facility is not one of those facilities covered under the state's climate change law. So as a result, the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the entire state of California is not even regulated under the state statute.
So is it because fracking is relatively, and I understand that in California a lot of fracking is actually still fracking for oil.
Mm-hmm.
So fracking for gas is kind of a new thing. Is that why it passed under regulation radar? Or is it just because, big oil, Jerry Brown and what have you, we're not really paying attention to the regulation?
Well, fracking has been around for a while, but we saw it really explode on the scene beginning around 2006 and 2007. And you're correct that fracking, which the longer name is hydraulic fracturing, and that refers to a special technique to extract oil or natural gas out of hard rock formations. And so it's known as an unconventional oil production. So in conventional oil and gas production, the oil or natural gas is sitting in a relatively easy to get at reservoir. It's basically like an underground ocean. And all you have to do is drill a vertical well. And once you reach that formation, you're able to extract that ocean of natural gas or oil. With fracking, the oil or natural gas, rather than being in a big giant reservoir, is instead trapped in millions of little fissures in very hard shale formations. And so to get at it, you have to inject at very high pressure a mixture, a chemical cocktail, if you will, of water mixed with a bunch of different very harmful chemicals, and including a lot of carcinogens and particulates like sand, in an effort to break apart or fracture or frack that rock formation to get at that trapped stuff. The big increase in fracking for oil and gas production came from two big developments. One, perfections in what's known as horizontal drilling, where instead of just drilling a vertical well, you're able to actually move the drill horizontally so that you're able to cover more territory in these shale formations. And so it's kind of like a spider's legs. You've got one drill well pad on the surface, and then you can have 8 or even 10 horizontal wells coming off that one vertical well. But the second, and by far the most important development that enabled the explosion of fracking production in the United States, was a removal of government regulation. Prior to 2005, it was expected that fracking had to comply with a variety of federal laws, including the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. There was some uncertainty, and there are in fact several lawsuits. The biggest one was actually in the Fayetteville Shale, beginning in 2003 and 2004, where residents were complaining about water drinking contamination, and had brought lawsuits saying that frackers operating in the area had failed to comply with the federal drinking water statutes. So in 2005, during the Bush administration, Congress rushed through a very large energy bill that contained a one-paragraph long provision that exempted hydraulic fracturing from having to comply with federal safe drinking water statutes. The removal of that regulation from the fracking industry gave them confidence that they didn't have to worry about contaminating water, because if they had to comply with the provisions of the Safe Drinking Water Act, prior to fracking, they would have to certify that their activity would not contaminate wells, right? You have to be proactive. Right now, you can bring suits if you find after the fact contamination. But of course, the industry makes it very hard to prove that wells have been contaminated from their activity. So it puts all the burden on affected families and communities. And it also, you cannot take action until you actually have already contaminated the water supply. And we've got hundreds of such examples across the country where that's happened. So that change in law made it much cheaper and much easier for the oil and gas industry to expand fracking opportunities. And that's why the United States has now become the largest oil producer in the world and the world's largest natural gas producer, because of the removal of these regulatory restrictions that have tipped the scales most decidedly in favor of the oil and gas industry.
That obviously must have spilled over not just from water but from air, because as I understand it, once they found the large leak in Elisa, that they also saw that there had been other smaller leaks going on already. Like there were already leaks happening
Right.
before they found the bigger ones. So not only, it doesn't even seem that there's good regulation, it seems that there's none. Is there nobody that is charged with going out to check these storage sites?
Right. So California, like most states, rely on self-regulation. The regulation consists of relying on the company to do its own well integrity tests and its own checks and to report to regulators that we have checked things out and everything is fine. That's inexcusable. That's not effective regulation from our point of view. And the problem with this particular facility is that they were storing this natural gas in old abandoned oil wells. And the integrity of those wells, some of these wells date back to the 1950s and earlier. And when you've got old wells like that, especially in an area like California that has lots of seismic activity, the ability for older wells to continue to remain viable and intact is going to erode over time. And we did not have a robust enough independent oversight to ensure the integrity and safety and security of these wells. So what we need to see going forward is, A, we need to see affirmative federal oversight over all natural gas and other underground petroleum storage facilities. And that regulatory oversight would entail two different types of activities. One would be affirming the security and safety of these facilities. And I think that the most appropriate agency would be under the Department of Transportation, the U.S. Department of Transportation, to have inspectors look at these wells and certify that they are adequate for storage. And the second federal regulation that needs to be enacted as part of the response to Aliso Canyon is providing the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency full jurisdiction over all underground existing oil and gas infrastructure for all methane and other leaks of greenhouse gases.
So I do want to ask you where we're at with that and how people can get involved.
Right.
But I also want to ask, so there's been a lot of, particularly some of the groups that I've been working with have been targeting FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, because they've been just greenlighting all these sorts of fracking endeavors, including an export plant at Cove Point. So when the regulatory agencies are the ones that seem to be also as corrupted as the self-regulating fracking companies, how do you, like, it seems like there's not just it's not just about giving regulatory agencies more power to regulate. It seems like you might have to do a complete overhaul of the
Right.
system of money flowing into these different regulatory commissions from those oil and gas industries.
Right. Well, you'll note that my reform plans had not mentioned FERC because I don't think that FERC is an appropriate agency to handle safety inspections or to handle emissions inspections. The Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is a very unique agency, and I've worked on FERC matters for more than 15 years. We helped put together some of the first research that identified Enron as the culprit in the California electricity crisis. And remember, that was all under FERC supervision.
Right.
And everything that Enron did, they did it with a green light from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So we've been exposing problems in the way that FERC handles its operations for an awful long time. The bulk of FERC's regulatory jurisdiction involve rate making. As part of siting for new facilities, they have to do environmental impact statement reviews. And FERC has decided, against the recommendations of the Obama administration, to not do comprehensive reviews that would include all the climate change impacts of natural gas production, transportation, and consumption through the burning of the fuel. Instead, they look very discreetly at just the environmental impacts from the operation of the exact facility, which is far too narrow-minded. I do not think that FERC is an appropriate agency to handle inspections of existing or new infrastructure, storage infrastructure, or for the mapping and controlling of methane leaks from this infrastructure.
Gotcha. So, and in closing, where are we at with the regulation that you're suggesting, or the changes you're suggesting?
Right.
And do you think that this is something that will happen first on like a California level, or even on a county level before it becomes a federal regulation?
Right. So there's a couple of different pathways for the federal reforms. One involves Congress, and the other does not need to involve Congress. So first, last year, the Obama administration proposed rules on methane leaks from new, not yet built oil and gas infrastructure. What we are now urging the Obama administration to do is to rewrite that rule to include existing oil and gas infrastructure. The second part, which would be to get the Department of Transportation, and there's a unit within the Department of Transportation called PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Safety Administration. And there we are going to need a change in law by Congress to authorize this agency to extend their current jurisdiction to include natural gas and other underground storage facilities. PHMSA currently has jurisdiction over pipelines, but not for storage facilities. That said, at this point, states are free to set their own regulatory standards. And so we applaud those state efforts. But we also understand that many states lack the technical expertise, they lack the financial resources that the federal government can provide. Because remember, Aliso Canyon is just one of more than 400 such facilities scattered across the United States. And a lot of communities have no idea about the existence of these types of facilities. And I'm reminded of this terrible story down in Arkansas from 2013. ExxonMobil operates a huge network of pipelines across the United States. One of their lines, it's the Pegasus line, a major crude oil underground pipeline. In 2013, this Pegasus line ruptured in Arkansas and completely contaminated and polluted an entire community. And one thing that struck me when dozens of these homeowners were interviewed, as their streets and their homes were literally under a huge ocean of oil that had leaked all over their community, they said, we bought our homes here and nobody told us there was a major oil pipeline. So even for a homeowner, there were no disclosures that a major pipeline was under their community. And I think that's really a big third component here, is that there is this sprawling, secret underground network of fossil fuel infrastructure that millions of people across the United States know nothing about. And we are not notified about the potential hazards or dangers that lurk below us. We should be entitled to that kind of information. And I think such right-to-know standards need to be more uniform.
So what can people do, finally, what can people do either to find out whether there's horizontal drilling like you talked about going on right underneath their property, or just get in touch with their representatives? How can people start finding out about this and get active and aware?
Right. So the first thing that people can do is contact your representatives, contact both of your senators, and demand that they support efforts for the United States Department of Transportation to have full jurisdiction over safety inspections of all underground oil and gas infrastructure, including storage facilities. And second, they need to demand that the Environmental Protection Agency extend rules to cover existing oil and gas infrastructure to monitor methane and other greenhouse gas emission leaks from these facilities. And third, people need to demand that their federal elected officials support any and all efforts to improve right-to-know protections so that there are affirmative disclosures to schools, to businesses, to home owners, and to renters of any and all nearby underground pipelines, storage facilities, or any other major underground oil and natural gas infrastructure that's in their communities.
So I can feel what some of you might be thinking right now. what good would it do for me to contact my representatives if they don't give a shit anyway? And with regards to the deeper corruption of our country, I agree with you. But in this case, don't fly that flag of apathy. Think about the stories that I just mentioned. Think about any of the good news stories that you've heard of come out of this sick, twisted system. It's not because the people on the inside saw a light. It's because the people on the outside shined a light. Now, Tyson's push for you to contact your representatives doesn't mean that you don't also need to protest and speak out publicly. But flooding phone lines and bugging the shit out of the cocooned cronies in DC should not and cannot be underestimated. Now, if you're of the mindset that screw it, even if we had regulation, it wouldn't help. I mean, these hypothetical future rules and demands don't sound intense enough. They don't make it sound like we've got a ticking time bomb called climate change hovering over us like a creepy guy in an office. And with that, I am inclined to agree. But this avenue of regulation is again one that shouldn't be cast aside. Why? Well, remember when Tyson mentioned the federal legislation that gave big oil and gas the loophole to avoid the Safe Water Act? Consider this. With stricter regulations in place, fracking projects would have to ensure the safety of their operations before they start fracking. Which, I mean, they'd have to submit health and environmental impact reports, legit ones, not ones they did themselves. And I think it's obvious by what we've seen from fracking in this country that pretty much all of those operations wouldn't make the cut. And the amount of money that companies would have to spend in order to uphold federal regulations that would be in place and inspections would outweigh the enormous sums of money that it takes to build these infrastructures, for now. As I also mentioned in episode 45, the export market for LNG is what's keeping these projects going. So while the push for these federal regulations is incredibly necessary, we have to move quickly with the fight against fracking as a whole, on the ground, in places like Cove Point and surrounding areas. So with that in mind, check out citizen.org for more information on Public Citizen and their work on the system side. And for more on the boots on the ground side of things, check out wearecovepoint.org and beyondextremeenergy.org. You can also check out Facebook to see images from a recent Beyond Extreme Energy action that we were a part of. And that, revolutionaries, does it for this week. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people you don't know. As usual, check out the last slide to see all the sites that I mentioned in this week's show, and be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. From a snowy Devil's Den, good night and act out.